Okay, so let's get started. TAs? I'd like to show that image on the screen. Only on the right projector. Only on the right. So today we're going to talk about Villa Maria. Interesting thing for us, it's really doing a number of things. One is it's a really great building, so that's worth knowing. Two, you already know it. If you don't, something is incredibly wrong with your education. If that's the case, you should be aware of it and fix it. Three, it fits in the theme of buildings organized, paying homage to a square, and developing linearly along the perimeter. So we've seen tons of those. Awatona, Salk, Asclepios. Four, it's a building which, yes, there aren't any more. Sorry, there aren't any more. So, yes, as an aside, so remember we're on four. Since my time at Ohio State, the number of staff has doubled, and the number of faculty has shrunk by about 20%. So, you would think that as a result of that, getting things like keeping the printers running would be really easy. Turns out it's harder than ever. So, God forbid I would prepare a handout on the day of the class. I'm well aware that's not a very bad idea. So I prepared it yesterday, printed it up to a certain point, and then the machine ran out of ink. It used to be no problem the machine ran out of ink because this local staff would fix it, but now it's an IT problem. IT leaves at 4:25. They get here at 7, but not for toner issues. So at some point today, the work is just stacking up. People are furious. At some point today, toner will be added, and I'll print more for Friday. But until then, there's really nothing I can do about it. These people cost a fortune, by the way, doing something. What are they? Who are they? Who are those people? The only reason I know, half of them I know what their jobs do. The other half I have no idea, except there are, every once in a while, there's a baby shower, and you get asked to give $20 to people you don't know what they do. Happy to do it. Keep things running smoothly. So anyway, yes, this half does not have the handout, but in fact that half is also tends to be grad students who either are smarter or think they are. So and obviously you should know Villa Maria. So those people are getting the images, so this is Villa Maria. So 4, back to that. This is there's an interesting connection between architecture and history. Certainly architecture takes place in history. What's the connection to it? We know if we go to a third-year studio that now is incredibly important. God forbid you do not do a project that does not look like now. But clearly now is just a series of shapes that are kind of cool. And then the question really becomes, is this the shapes that are cool, what's so cool, or is it what they're doing? So it's interesting, we look at fashion. It's very difficult for fashion houses to maintain sort of patent rights when you can change the pattern so quickly and it's not covered by the patent or the sort of protection. Or in some countries, what the hell, you just copy it. So here's the thing about fashion is if you change a design slightly, the print of a flower on a dress, for example, if you change it, the cut is slightly different, the print is slightly different, you still get the connection. You sort of wonder what the difference, how important the difference is. So I have to say, in terms of fashion, I really don't know. You wonder why that's not true of, it must be true of everything. It must be true of glasses. Why would you pay $500 for a pair of Italian glasses when you can get knockoffs for $25 that are, to most people, either very similar or no worse. So I'm a little more concerned about, or a little more certain about more design stuff like furniture. So for example, if you wanted to buy a Eames lounge chair, which are very nice chairs, A, I love the design, B, they're incredibly comfortable. They will set you back about $5,000. Until recently, you could buy knockoffs that were identical, possibly not as good leather, but virtually identical, possibly not as quite as comfortable, for about $500, so 1/10 the price. They've been taken to court. That's been stopped. So now the knockoffs don't look quite the same. That they're slightly different shape. Interesting thing for us, unlike fashion or the glasses, once you start changing the shape, you start changing the argument. So in fact, one of the things that it could be a better argument, it could be a different argument, just as good, or it could just be gibberish. So for example, my Chinese characters, which look to most people like Chinese, are actually gibberish. They stand for Chinese just as well as, they don't even need to be Chinese to stand for Chinese. That's all they're doing. So the gibberish is just as good as the real thing. I think in terms of architecture, the gibberish is not, it's just gibberish, possibly. Possibly you could stumble onto something. But so just having pieces which are recognizably valuable conceptually to some project stuck on your project is just gibberish. So, the interesting about history, other than now, is we're stuck in history, we're stuck in time. What's its function? What's the sort of role? Well, one of the sad roles history has is that anything which is old gets value, such as myself, incredibly valuable, just really because I'm old. You look at a place like Columbus, there's a thing called Landmarks Columbus. They're a lovely group of people. They go out around trying to save old buildings. Good luck with that in Columbus. But the problem is, what's left in Columbus, A, a lot of it was never very good, and B, other than being old, it doesn't have much to recommend it, so it's kind of a really lost cause. Almost everything halfway decent has been torn down. The crap will just stand till the end of time. That's what's so odd. Just, the abandoned CVS on Cleveland Avenue, no one's going to touch that. No arsonist worth his salt wants to go near it. You would go towards the wood frame 19th century church. So one of the things that Bill Amari is doing is going to look at the question of history. So we're going to, this will be the sort of the segue to the next couple of lectures, looking at history, looking at A, history itself, and then B, relation to architecture, and C, buildings that relate to that. So this is a really great example of that. And finally, which is 5, I think, is culture. This is a building which has a strong connection to a kind of local culture. Which for us is sort of a funny thing to say. You sort of, what would local culture in Columbus be? I don't know. Bob Evans, White Tower, White Castle, something. But this happens to be maybe slightly different. It's Finland. So going back to last Friday, we were talking about, at the end of this lecture, we were talking about this different landscape tradition between north and south of Europe, where in the south, a special landscape, you could call it a garden, becomes really a grove of trees, which is sort of protected, and in the north, it becomes the exact opposite. It's the clearing in the trees. This is Finland, it's the north. I think we were talking before about the Finns. It's a Scandinavian country, but it's not really Scandinavian because they don't speak a Germanic language. They speak Finnish, which is not Germanic. It is God knows what. It comes from the Urals. Distant related to Hungarian. Also, Hungarians come from the Urals, so it's a Euro-Ugric language, of which there are 3, Finnish, Estonian, and Hungarian. The Hungarians swept from the Urals as a conquering horde, swooping across the steppes into Eastern Europe, pushing all their way. The Finns moved across the steppes at about 200 feet a year. Not exactly conquering hordes, and not even noticeable. I'm always reminded of the people hidden by bushes, carrying a bush, sort of moving along. That must have been the Finns. Did the people sort of notice they were coming through? I don't know. So they moved thousands of miles from the Urals. I don't know what motivated them, and they got to Finland, which is a land that's very cold, has no natural resources, and is 10% water. And they said, this is it. This is heaven. So they're very odd people. They survived, although it's been a country really only since the First World War. That for hundreds of years it was really a protectorate of Sweden until about 1800, at which time it became a duchy of the Russian Empire. But during that time, so they really never had much of the way to amount to anything, didn't really industrialize, had very few cities. Helsinki is virtually the same age as Columbus, little older. It's not particularly old. Just parenthetically, it's almost exactly the same size in terms of metropolitan area and central city. If I said one of these two cities, Columbus and Helsinki, was the only city to be bombed heavily by both sides during World War II, and you looked at them today, you would swear it was Columbus. It was Helsinki. Which city has a rail rapid transit system? Helsinki. Which city has intricate streetcar network every 5 minutes? Helsinki. Which has high-speed suburban rail, 110 miles an hour? Helsinki. Which has high-speed intercity rail? Helsinki. What does Columbus have? It's a modest list. And in this, so you think, there's incredible wealth in this country. What we produce with it publicly is a bit sad, sort of more like Haiti than Northern Europe. Highest home ownership in the world, Finland. Highest second home ownership in the world, Finland. And it's also interesting because Finland and Sweden are so similar. If you look at them, they're so similar, except home ownership, a majority of Swedes rent, and they rent publicly owned houses. So a very different economic model that has almost no impact visually and no impact in terms of quality of life. Both live quite comfortably. Also, the other thing about comparing, what a great art project this would be, comparing Helsinki to Columbus. Find the slums in Columbus, decaying housing, crappy schools, God, it's so easy. Helsinki doesn't exist. Poverty, hard to find it. Hunger doesn't exist. You have to explain what the food bags of food, bins of food are outside the checkout at Giant Eagle. What is this? Well, people here are hungry. Richest country in the world. So yes, highest home ownership in the world, highest second home ownership, and the second figure is really what's really key. The idea of the second home is not just you have a place at Tahoe. It would always be a cabin, and the cabin would be in the country, and the country would be in the forest, and it would be by the lake. And again, it has to do with this sort of Finnish ethos of the woods and the lake. And it would also always be simple. So it would not be unusual for a second home to have no running water. You wouldn't want it. You wouldn't have a toilet, some little john out in the woods. You have a pump to get water, and a view of the lake. And this really has to do with part of their Finnish identity. So again, they've only been a country since really 1918, but for thousands of years they've maintained a culture really through the language. They're very similar to the Welsh in that respect. So all the other Celtic languages have disappeared, given English influence. Welsh has not, which is odd because it's the most closely associated with England. It's like the Basques in Spain. So the culture they picked up is virtually Scandinavian, but the fact the language isn't, and the language is also stuck with this ethos about the forest, which we'll get into later. So when you have a second home, what you want is a place in the forest next to a lake. And given the fact that Finland is 10% water, this is usually pretty easy. It is not easy in the area that Villamarra is. So Villamarra is sort of central west coast, where there are a high proportion of Swedish speakers. And the family is the Gulliksons. They're the client. They they own a paper mill and lumber mill. They want a summer house. They have tons of money. And their summer house is actually right next to another house. There's a big house. There's a big estate right here. This is not very far from Oulu, which is the major, probably the oldest. What the hell? So Aalto's problem is, A, how to find a meadow, how to find a clearing in the forest, and how to find the lake. Well, the lake's not going to exist. So obviously you're going to have to have a swimming pool. You would want a swimming pool anyway. This becomes it. So first of all, what's interesting is, this is the site plan actually that Aalto drew, that in this sort of, this could easily be central Ohio. It's pretty flat. There's no water. It's kind of treed off and on. It's really heavily farmed. But in this kind of grove of trees that belongs to the estate, the main house is just to the up of this. Not very good. You walk it some 100 yards. This thing gets built. And you can see immediately, but part of its argument is two L's, L1, L2, locked together to make sort of a larger frame. And then clearly that other frame is the forest on the opposite side. So he's grabbing that view of the forest. So there's L1, there's L2. L1 is really thin, L2 is really fat. That's actually the house, that's actually not the house. And then this edge, which is the forest, is becoming sort of de facto the other edge. So there are really two series of brackets. There's house to forest, which is forcing this bracketing and therefore making a clearing. And there's within the house also the two brackets, the two L's. So we know immediately this is one hell of a four square. Which is certainly true. So let's go back to the idea that in the south I have the copse of trees, in the north I've got the clearing. So there we are. Imagine ourselves in Italy or Greece. We're looking at a garden or a sacred grove. We're standing with the goats or the sheep, looking at these objects. What makes them? Well, it's pretty clear that the trees themselves make their own edge. The grove of trees makes its edge. Let's move to the north, where we're standing in the forest. We find a clearing. What makes the edge of the clearing? Is it the clearing? Does the clearing have an edge? And the answer is no. It's residual. It's made by the edge of the trees. So in both cases, the trees have the job of making the edge. So an interesting thing happens. So here we have the bracketing. Here is this line of trees. Here's the house, L1, L2. Bracketing that, this is the clearing. And what's interesting is what starts to emerge right here by the edge of the trees is the dirt starts to mound. A bit of a boomerang shape. It wasn't there. It's been put there by Aalto, and it sort of has the job of being right at that edge. And then from that emerges a row of sticks with a little gate, and then from that emerges a little stone wall, which is the beginning of the other L. So, what does that remind you of? The dirt, the sticks, and the stone. Well, I would say, A, they're all building materials. B, they sort of are organized in terms of primitive or quickness. Nazis are coming in 5 minutes, I'm building with dirt. They're coming in 10 years, I'm building in stone. They're coming in a couple of months, I'm building with sticks. So it's kind of this trajectory of sophistication of building material. It also reminds me of what little children's story. Yes? Three Little Pigs. Pretty much the same argument. That has to do with substantiality. This has to do both with certainly that, but also a kind of history and an idea of permanence. So clearly, building with stone is a lot more sophisticated than just building up with dirt, and the sticks are sort of in between the two. And the idea that these are all really doing the same things, they're all making the edge to the clearing, and that the clearing, here's just being made by the trees. Here, all of a sudden the mound is taking over, says I can now do this. And when that happens, trees kind of move off, and then this becomes the edge. And obviously, eventually, the double L's are going to become the edge going into the house. So not unlike what we've seen with other buildings, there's this sort of evolution starting to occur. And the first step of that evolution is the mound. That the mound is the first step where the role of the tree is being taken over by the mound. And then there's this little micro-evolution from A to B to C right there in terms of getting that thing going. So that's really easy to understand, really easy to see. And we're going to discover that, in fact, that difference, we can start to suspect it already, that difference is going to continue here. You can see that, well, this is an L, this is M, whatever. Clearly, there's a continuous system, it's linear, and clearly there's some kind of a transformation from almost nothing to something, which will turn out to be true. But going back to that little moment, especially going back to the mound, so A is just a pile of dirt, it has grass on it, it's not particularly attractive. It's a bit like the blob of 2018, except its shape is much more particular. A, it's a blob, and B, it's making a corner given that bend. Not an exact L, but it sort of gets this thing going. But the other thing is, and just look at how it's drawn. So, there's this, here's land, here's ground, and then there's this thing, which is also just dirt with grass on it, and here's a tree. So you look at that, you say, just given the drawing, you would say, well, that's interesting, because the grass is just a surface. There's no figure there. Clearly the mound, it might be grass, but it's also a figure. It's quite different. It's a green lumpy thing, and you say, well, the tree is also a green lumpy thing. To some degree, those are united, just formally. And I think that's true. That to some degree, we almost see the tree emerging from the ground, or we see the tree just as canopy and no sticks. And the funny thing is, given that argument, that this is all canopy and no stick, that then all of a sudden the emerging stick wall from this really sort of represents a reconstruction of the same pieces. That I've simply taken that off, stuck with the blob, taken this, now moved it into that sort of situation. Also Wallace Wallum, pretty clearly going on. You also sort of wonder, where would the dirt come from? And in fact, what's interesting is right next to this is the pool, which is shaped very similarly, like a sock, L-shaped, which is obviously a void. So we're back to Burrow and Barrow, so the discussion of those two things. This is sort of, I'm missing dirt, here I've added dirt, subtraction and addition. They're incredibly sympathetic, so to some degree, these are related, that the edge and the center of the space are related, which has helped make me create the lake. So the lake, sort of early on with that. But there's also more, and that goes back to the idea of the fins again. So here they are crossing Europe from the Urals to this hellish swamp. And they're bringing with them their culture, which is an idea about the forest and an idea about nature and their language. And really that's about it, except for two other things. One is, and there's probably some pots and pans, might have a fire, might have a domestic animal, maybe not. One is a creation myth. And the other is a sauna. So it's actually sauna, it's a Finnish word. There are lots of other cultures that have sauna-like things. One would be the Native American Indians would have had these things. And the interesting things, they would be called wiki-ups. And they would be made by, here's a landscape. They'd be very temporary. They'd be traveling around. You want a sauna, so you take some dirt, you dig a hole, you put the pile over there, you then put some sticks here, you then put the dirt back on the sticks, you leave a hole, you go in, you build a fire, you let the fire go out, and then you go in. So it's a bit smoky, but it's hot. So you then sweat. The sweat, it warms you up, given the fact that Finland is a country that begins about 50 miles north of here. It's cold. And also it cleans you. So Scandinavians are famous for their hygiene. Even Germans, if you go to Dresden, one of the major museums is the Museum of German Hygiene. You're not going to find that in Columbus. And the Finns are so as they're traveling across the steppes of Russia from the Urals, they just keep making these things. So this would be a very primitive sauna, but it's really their architecture as their culture and this involves that. It also keeps them warm. If you ever have a sauna in the middle of winter in Finland, you can go outside and it's minus 30. You don't care. You don't care for about 2 hours. Sort of a wonderful feeling. You couldn't possibly wear a jacket. The body is too hot. It takes forever to lose that heat. We're so liquid. Plus, you're kind of clean. So they're bringing this thing with them. I just compare that. What would a Wikiup look like? Well, it's a mound of dirt, fairly shapeless, on the ground, pretty much like what that thing is. So see what that little mound is, all the jobs it has to do. Either I look at it and say, that is a blob. I'm really into blobs. It's a wonderful thing. I want to reproduce that shape. But this is a shape that has a job to do. One is it's making an edge. 2 is it's making a corner. 3 is making a relationship to the trees. 4 is developing this sort of deconstructed argument of the trees that begins this trajectory. And 5 is relating to the pool. 6 is relating to the origins of architecture, Finnish style, which is essentially the sauna, the primitive sauna. So it has lots of jobs to do. So from the get-go, I know what it's doing. I know that it's establishing the edge of the clearing as its own thing, that the entire scheme is in fact a recapitulation of the edge on its own terms as opposed to the forest. It's sort of setting that in motion in terms of a history. I see this trajectory. And it's talking about an origins not just in terms of materials, but also in terms of architecture, shape. That is the origin of Finnish architecture. So Villamarra is really taking, other than just it's just a summer house, it's taking on a lot of baggage in terms of making a setting which is sufficient for the summer house, that is a clearing in the forest with a lake, and the entire thing is going to evolve from a primitive sauna, which also has the job of sort of setting this in motion in terms of a history, but also as a series of trajectories, and also making a discussion of a recapitulation of the forest itself. Big job to do. So if we look at plan, we can see that, so here's the pool of it is here, the mound is here, here's that trajectory to the wall. So we have the edge stuff, here's the edge of the forest, becoming the mound, becoming the sticks, becoming the wall. This trajectory is going, we now have the pool. It's sort of an outrigger to it's clearly paired with a mound as two things, but also it's sort of, it's the object in the meadow. And because of its shape, it's also describing another sort of a center, weakly, but there it is, which turns out actually to be the center of the Paradise Garden. So I can look at the shape of the pool, I could say A, it's kidney shaped, tells me it's mid-20th century. B, it's very similar to the mound. C, it seems amorphous and blobby. D, is paying homage to a center. All those are true. These are all jobs it's performing, and that's all jobs which are necessary to it. So, not unlike Owatonna, if we look at the outside walls of Owatonna, we saw that a column exists, a flying beam starts to emerge from the column. That's going to start to set up this whole trajectory. But the outside edges are fairly solid. The inside edges are constantly transforming, which is going to make that snake. And we're going to start capturing this space, which is really this leftover residual stuff, is going to start being captured and turned into all this material. And lo and behold, you have an object. So there's this gradual transformation. And interesting enough, exactly the same thing happens here. That I'm capturing space between the sauna and the pool. But they're already saying, for God's sakes, we're similar, we're paired. And in fact, the space I'm finding here, even the pool changes its shape, that the one edge of the pool becomes really straight here. It's the only time. Blobbing all over the place. Not here. Becoming straight. So all of a sudden, these are aligned. That space is starting to become figural, slightly. Bam! first piece of building, and that is the sauna. So there's the stone wall, there's the pool, blobbing around. There's the sticks, there's the mound. This space is being captured, and all of a sudden, not just the building, but in fact, there's a roof. Very much like Owatonna, that space, which is a nothing between two somethings, all of a sudden becomes its own something. And then the first piece of, is going to make this loggia. So if you look at the difference between the first floor plan and the second floor plan, one can see on the first floor plan that in fact it's pretty much just wall and canopy. The second floor, it's the roof. So on the second floor, it looks really competitive with the main house. The first floor, it's just a little wall. So this loggia is going to continue and go on there. It's going to separate the sauna from the rest of the house. So this is the sauna. All the rest of the house is over here, with one exception. There's just a wall, and this is the loggia. So another funny thing about the sauna, so you think of Aalto, you think A, Finnish, B, architects, C, 20th century. Really A prime is pretty darn good. He's a really brilliant designer. But pretty much everything. Aalto furniture, Aalto knickknacks, vases and whatnot, really nice. So incredibly competent, also modern. So if you one of your architect friends is getting married, an Aalto vase would be a nice thing to give that would cost you $140. They're really pretty. People will love getting them, especially the architects, and they're maybe 100 years old. Interesting enough, in this world of A, an incredibly competent designer who's really good with modernism, he will never design a modern sauna. It will always be traditional. And I think this just signals sort of this Finnish focus on their origins and their sort of position in the world. So it's also true that the whole point of Villa Maria, they don't even need the house, they have another one right next to it. The whole point is to have a nice, modern, wonderful thing we can move to in the summertime. But it's strange that the sauna, and it was never a debate, it was always from the get-go, the sauna was primitive. It's made very primitively. It's wooden. It looks like a rustic cabin. It looks like it's been there for centuries. It's got stuff growing on it, just from the get-go. So this, and also sort of given the fact that this is where the sauna actually is, and that's where the mound is, which looks like the smoke sauna, and there's this clearly a relationship between them functionally and figuratively. Clearly, this is the next stage along that part of that trajectory. We're sort of still locked back in what a history is. It's also interesting there's the mound, here are the sticks, there's the stone wall. So obviously, this is the surface of the earth. Now all of a sudden the surface of the earth on top of the mound is a bit higher, it's just grass. Sticks don't give a damn. Here's the stone wall. The top of the stone wall is moss. So it didn't just get there. Dirt was put there. It's really a fabulous little moss garden. But it's clearly also saying, to some degree, that is really the new ground plane, or it's a ground plane, which is up there, which is also telling us where the stones came from. That in fact the stones are not normally there. They've clearly come from the ground. So again, the stones are also saying we're coming from the ground. They could have come from the pool. There's this ambiguity of ground plane. From the certainty here, this is the only option. Now all of a sudden there's a prime, which is that. And when I get to the loggia and the sauna, all of a sudden I still have that one. I now have a double prime, which is the roof of the sauna, which is also a moss garden. And that's the whole roof of the loggia is moss. There will then be, in the main building, another version, which will be the this will turn into the roof of the dining room, and then above that there is another garden. It's really pathetic on the roof for sunbathing. So there, from one simple ground plane, sectionally, the scheme is going to evolve into 4 different candidates for ground plainness, as though that sort of primal moment of what the site condition is going to continue to be made more complex and multifarious sort of as it moves through the building. But there'll be these constant claims on the continuity of the ground plane, really at all the different levels. When we move into the house, so eventually the loggia is going to come around here and slam into the house. This will all be covered. There are 2 exceptions. This corner sort of disappears, sort of cuts a corner. And so I'm missing stuff there. It's too little. And here there is slightly too much, almost the same. Always reminds me of what happens at Ohio State when a sidewalk is turning a corner. People just cut it there. So this is a kind of a fluidity around this corner. As a result of that, there's also kind of a fluidity around the shape of the loggia at that corner, which starts for a moment to define something a little more sinuousy. And that's actually also the place of a tree. Actually, this stops the world. There's a tree here. This is an old tree. It was there before the house was built. They sort of built around it. It's a very pretty tree, an angle. So what's interesting about that little detail is, A, basically this is L-shaped. B, it's not exactly L-shaped because it's cutting this corner. And C, for a moment, the sort of odd shape you get there as it cuts across could easily be a discussion of the tree canopy itself. So again, it's doing a number of jobs. And when we get back to the trees, it's sort of interesting, certainly conceptually, that this whole thing is in the forest. That the whole position is in a clearing in the forest, where you're getting rid of the trees. And in the clearing, there is the pool, but there's also the tree, the single tree. And that single tree also seems to be controlling that corner. So we then move down into the regular sort of the house. This is the service wing. This is the sort of living wing, at least on this floor. There is the main entry here from the outside, coming in. There's a big porch which extends there to allow me to come in the rain easily. There is one room which is not in this scheme. It is not in the service bar. It is not in the served bar, which has accommodation for all different types of rooms, all different types of space, except this one. So it's not as though it couldn't be, it just isn't. And in fact, it's the dining room. And it's here. So the diagram is really pretty darn simple. There's the primitive L, the fat L of the house. Here is the loggia via Happening. Here's the sauna, primitive. That clearly is part of this trajectory, which you'd think is about, to some degree, the trajectory is about movement around the courtyard and constant development, which is certainly true, from the mound to the sticks, to the wall, to the loggia, to the sauna, to the sort of continuation of the loggia. This is really simple stuff. This is becoming much more complex. It's going to start expressing itself more individually out over here. Doesn't happen over here. But clearly increasing complexity. We've seen this before. It's so Asclepios. Except for this guy, which says I nest in that. I'm kind of armpitting in the way the cloister at Norwich armpits into the cross-axis of the church. But I really don't belong to that trajectory. There's in fact something else happening. So not just this, but also that. So something very interesting is happening here where to some degree this thing does not bend, but sort of just locks over. That really becomes the diagram. Where the fatness occurs, that's what the house is going to do to keep wrapping around this. This is saying I'm losing interest in the idea of a courtyard. I'm just going my merry way. So it's interesting that from that one origin there's this splice where those things develop, where the fatness occurs. When I started getting the architecture, that's interested in imitating the L, moving back around the courtyard couldn't be clearer, and this guy is not. And it's also interesting that the dining room is stuck in that thing. So we know that that this gesture is going to then isolate, A, the dining room is isolated, B, it's isolated in something which is not really part of the rest of the house, C, it will not be part of this continued sort of historical evolution of the house. It's stuck with something else. We also know that it's also aligned with entry, which programmatically is a really bad idea. You can't think of many houses. Think about Wanda's house in Worthington, where the door goes right into the living room. Well, that's a nightmare. You get snow coming in. You're having, you're watching Thanksgiving football games, and the doorbell rings. It's the paper boy or Jehovah's Witnesses, whatever, and they're right there with you. You kind of want a vestibule for that to happen, sort of get them away. And certainly, they're not entering the dining room. Just even as crappy as Columbus houses are, and they're extraordinary, like essays in crappiness, that will rarely happen. So it seems strange that in this case, this is Alto, that he's making that happen. He's aligning those two things. So clearly, just bells are going off. Something is going on. We also look at the sort of space we're finding. So in the service part of the house, they're perfectly nice spaces. They're pretty simple, pretty cellular. In the more public part of the house, they're not so cellular. The space is much more fluid. There are much fewer walls, and the rooms, to the degree they're defined at all, tend to start popping out from the surface and making their own objects, just like Asclepios or Salk. We'll see that in better detail on Friday. So it's interesting that so it's clearly a lot could have happened there. It's clearly the dining room that does not happen. And it really goes back to the nature of dining. So Thanksgiving is coming up. It's an odd holiday for college, especially Ohio State. It's just the really bad time to leave campus. You have one more week of class. You drive back to wherever, Pataskala or East Paducah. To see these people, well, there's mom and dad, but there's also Uncle Fester and Aunt Wanda. Uncle Fester's, the teeth keep dropping out. Aunt Wanda's just babbling. And what are you doing? You're watching people eat. I can't, other than going to the bathroom, I can't imagine any activity where just watching people, it's very unpleasant. Sort of you're masticating dead material, trying to soften it and get it into the intestines. Ooh, sort of wash it down a bit to get it moving. Or that bit of stuff, is it a bone? What is it? How do you discreetly remove it? It's grotesque. So why do we do it? Why don't we just get all together and have some dip and watch football, or just meet in a lake somewhere? It has to do really back to the idea of the survival of the species, that we depend on food. We depend on sharing food, that family, a baby born, dropped in the woods, dead in seconds. How the species survived, I have no idea. Neanderthal 14-year-olds, could you leave them at home in the cave? Would it be dangerous? It's just a miracle. So what's interesting is that so the dining room sort of takes on this role as a real throwback to really essential survival. What are we? We exist as a family. Family is sharing food. Companion. We gather with our friends, family, and companions. Companion. The root is someone you share bread with, literally, com with, panos, bread. So I think that Alto is using that to sort of signal this is not like anything else. This is kind of a primitive, very primitive, essential nature of the survival of the species and of the individual. Having food, getting food, sharing food, and being provided for. So it's interesting. The dining room, the room is odd. It's very narrow, very long. It does not look particularly modern. The proportions are bizarre. Very long. You're well aware of the length. The roof is a little goofy. Half of it's sloped for no particular reason, but it really starts to break it up into halves. And the far wall is a fireplace, but it's not it's a kitchen fireplace you would find in a 16th century peasant's hut. So it's made out of brick, brick or stone. It's very rustic. It's a place where you would cook food. Clearly they don't cook food in it, but on Christmas you might have wine being heated in it. You sort of wonder why and clearly the directionality of it, the linearity, you're just forced to see this thing. Gullikson put some copper pots there. It's an odd thing. So that's worth thinking about. What the hell is going on with the dining rooms? We know that as an activity it's really quite different. It's interesting being singled out. We know that also the entry, nice to have it, but in fact there's no particular reason why it belongs to that trajectory, so Aalto is forcing that to happen, and there's also the combination of these two things is quite odd. If we look at the entry, so the dining room it's pretty long. You can it looks like it's in a storage crate. Very long, very linear. The canopy is also long and linear. It sort of comes out to get you, but as it comes out, it starts to wobble. So there are two things about it we know simultaneously. One is it's flat as a pancake. It's just surgically flat. It is a plane. And two is it's kind of losing its orientation in terms of what the edges are doing. It's almost like it's being spewed out from the house. So this is just going. And also this is the origin to tons of modern projects, especially third-year stuff. This is the original sticks akimbo. So there are lots of sticks holding this thing up. Some are at angles, don't really care. And clearly, what am I seeing? Lots of sticks. This wobbly thing, happens to be a surface, this wobbly thing. There's the facade. It's the forest. Well, that's odd. How did that happen? So I thought we got rid of the forest. I thought the whole trajectory of this. But it's interesting. One is sort of in this movement towards modernity, which is going to get us to a very sophisticated house. There's a slight switch where this sort of axis of the loggia continues. We get the dining room, a very retarded space. It's not like anything else in the house. Crossing over this, coming out the other side, becoming the canopy. So this alignment, which is quite awkward, is clearly this being used to describe really a number of things. So you look at the canopy, and first you would say, what's interesting is you're seeing, on the homeworks, it's interesting, you can see something. Remember Professor Graff, when he arrives in the bloody lab coat with the chainsaw? But he says, I want to be your friend. Only an idiot would say, thank heavens for that. You would be concerned because there seemed to be conflicting information. So the same is true with the analyses, that you might be looking at one thing is doing, something is doing one thing, fine, it's also doing another thing. They might be related, they might be opposite, but it's not just one thing, it's doing something. In this case, they're the opposite. So I look at this, I look at that canopy, and I would say really two things. One is, God, this looks modern. It looks really modern the way that sort of Burle Marx, sort of Brazilian early 20th century architecture would be, with sort of, you think of Copacabana pathways, very thin slabs of concrete being held up on sticks somehow. Still a huge motif. Sana is getting a lot of mileage out of that. So clearly I say, like the thing is to say, this is one hell of a modern thing, but also you look at it and say, oddly enough, it looks like the forest. And the third thing it looks like the modern thing, which is just losing its will to understand what its own form is just sort of losing it. So that's interesting. As a little aside, we want to go to Rome. And we're walking around Rome. And do you know what a cartouche is? Grad students? Tell Jackie you don't know what a cartouche is. So a cartouche would be something above a door, which would have the emblem of the family on it. So you walk around Rome, all the palazzi would have cartouches. You look up, you can see this must be a Medici. It has the three little pawn balls. Barbarinis, hugely important family, fabulous palace. The cartouche is the emblem is three B's. So clearly, it has to do with A, industriousness, B, order, and C is a play on the name Barberini with all the B's, lots of B's. And the B's are always in exactly the same position. B1, B2, B3. Locked in this triangle. They always fly in formation. So you'll see this emblem, some of the Barbarinis were popes. You'll just see this emblem on tons of things. Always stands for Barberini. There is one time when you have the three B's and you're not in formation, and that is on the Barberini Pope's tomb. So the Pope at Barberini has died. That's the leader. The B's are leaderless. So on the tomb, you have three B's just be a sitting. One here, one over there, one over here. They don't know what to do. They sort of lost that formation. So what a great graphic that is. But you think of the, sort of that moment where, for the one time, there's this loss of the idea of what sort of geometry they should be holding in formation. And you look at the canopy of the Villa Maria, it's really thematically very similar. You're sort of seeing the complete loss of thematic material about geometry, especially when from the get-go, from the first origins of this thing, this had been one hell of a coherent, it's very boring, this huge straight box coming at you, of which the canopy is clearly a continuation on B, sort of the loss. So we look at the canopy, we understand those three things simultaneously. One, it's really cool, looks really modern. Two, it looks like the forest. And three, it looks like it's losing its shape. I'd have to understand all of those things to get it. And it's interesting, the idea of its loss of shape, because there will be other things in here which are going to be compared with. So, for example, there's the wall, loggia, big fat thing. So the big fat thing, pretty much accurate. Dining room not doing that, canopy not really doing that, but clearly this stuff is moving around. Let's see how that's organized. It is in the this part. There is these service rooms. This is the kitchen. This is the big servery. Primarily these rooms are looking out, looking in, not so easy. There's a big gap here. Then I discover this stuff. Here's the entry canopy, and then here's all the public spaces. This is really sort of the hallway. So this is a coat room, toilets for guests. That's going to form this kind of trajectory coming this way. So from that seat over there, I go up there, my coat, and refresh myself, spend a penny. That axis is then going to organize this stuff. Here I'm going to find the study, organized around that. I'm then moving this way. I sort of see into the dining room. Thank God he's made a section there. So it's about a 4-foot difference. So in fact, with the 3-foot parapet, there's a 7-foot high wall. You can look into the ceiling of the dining room. You actually can't see what's there. You can't see Aunt Wanda getting chicken out of her teeth. So you look into the dining room, you move this way, up some steps, you get this view of the courtyard, and then you move back this way. So there's really kind of a lovely organization. Having set this up, could be the Temple of Bacchus, doing much the same thing. You enter, move to one side, and move back this way across that axis. You're using that axis as a datum to organize the route. And then in that world, you start to find differences. The differences would be, having done that the first thing is the study. The next is the living room, which pushes out, really pushes out. Here's a stairway up. Again, the forest. Here's a fireplace, odd place for it. You don't know exactly what this thing is as you move around. Interesting enough, having made this courtyard, other than the dining room, none of the major rooms looks into it. You look out of it. The study looks out, the living room really looks out, this whole corner really just explodes open. And this is in fact a porch, which will get me back into the courtyard. On the second floor, something very similar happens in terms of this idea of development, but even more so. So there's the service wings, there's the service bedrooms. It's interesting that this opens up, this actually breaks. The front stuff does not connect, it actually finally hits the wall there, and then the second floor, that really happens. So there's the floor of the dining room down over there, so the dining room, here's where the stuff is happening. These are the kids' bedrooms, breaking apart. They're looking this way, and so they break apart internally. Their windows become these really lovely little window seats, little window boxes. They're clearly becoming their own little buildings, and they're leaving the geometry. They're moving out. And then I find there are two master bedrooms. There's the first one, which breaks out that way, and then the third one breaks out even further this way. They're clearly becoming their own objects. And then the last thing I find is the studio, the painting studio, which sits up top the porch down below, which it starts off being kind of orthogonal, and then has a glass wall, and then a balcony, which basically says, what the hell? Clearly, there's some sort of a separatrix, which we move from this interior space to this thing, always reminded of a muffin, where this one says, I just don't care about orthogonality. I'm now my own thing. So include being my own thing within the idea of the bar, within the idea of the L, which is pretty continuous. From that first shear, where there are now two trajectories, this guy and this guy, then increasingly the theme of both of those is I'm going to become my own thing. This idea of independence and sort of breaking from orthogonality and breaking from the line. So it's certainly true here in terms of breaking from internally into the separate pieces. Externally, into these little objects, what the windows are doing, and the entire room becomes the object. And finally, the entire room becomes the object and sort of loses geometry. But the interesting thing is we then compare that. We say, okay, so this is about the loss of geometry. What about that in the canopy? And the funny thing is, you look at that, you would really say much the same thing. A, this looks really modern. B, it looks like a forest. And C, it looks like it's losing its geometry. It looks like it doesn't care. And I think all those are true. So what's interesting is, I think Aalto is making this really interesting connection between sort of the multiple roles of shape. He's saying, one time in terms of history, that Villamaria is very involved with this evolution from this first edge of a clearing to this pile of dirt, to the sticks, to the stones, to the pool inside, and the loggia is discovered. The separation between what the loggia is doing and what the enclosure is doing with the double L. And as this evolves, it becomes increasingly sophisticated, increasingly modern, increasingly independent. But in that independence, as these things start to become so independent that they lose connection to the orthogonal, they're taking on qualities which are, A, we understand as being modern, and B, primitive. And C, nature. And with this final piece, it's not just that it has that shape, but in fact the stuff below it, so there's this balcony, this is the glass wall for the studio. Here the strut, there's steel columns, painted white. This is wooden sticks on which vines are growing. So depending on when you visit, it clearly looks like a thicket of trees. In fact, it looks like a thicket of birch, which makes some sense because in Finland there are only 3 types of trees that are natural. 2 types of pine and birch. So this is a really familiar tree form to the Finns. As you look at this, it's like a birch tree. Oddly enough, to some degree, the entire scheme is turning back into the forest, even though it's modern. So this sort of brilliant collapsing of extraordinary modernity, the sort of modernity that still gets juices flowing in for sauna and REM and dwell, various degrees of sophistication. But also sort of turning back to the forest, as though he's saying there really is no time. There is this constant collapse. And certainly the idea of the daimyo, with that collapse back to very primitive state very quickly, is part of that revelation. Okay, we'll continue with this on Friday. There's a homework due on Friday. Those people who didn't get a handout today will get one on Friday.
Oh, that's right.
Oh my heavens, seriously. What the fuck did I do? Yeah.
So I think probably rather than do it here every week, we'll do it in, if you could go to the graduate studio, find your TA, and just give them something between, what's your studio start? 150? Between 1:30 and 1:50?